I have this balanced very precariously, and it will be a miracle if the phone does not fall off the barbecue, which is, of course, what every professional uses as a tripod before the end of this video. So it is I, the weird writer in the woods, returning to you again, and there's a dog sneezing in the background, which I don't know if you can hear that over all the various bugs out here, but that is the thing. I had two ideas for today's video, and I'll probably end up doing both of them at one point. But the first one was just kind of like my writer's journey, how I published and when I published and why I chose indie. And the second one was talking about dating books. Not like taking them out for dinner, but like people will say things that date fiction, like tie it to a time frame. And let's think, which one do I want to do today? Because I did do a whole outline for the dating book things, but then I thought maybe it would be more helpful for you guys to know my journey. And maybe it will, but I'll do that later. So we're sticking with the one that actually, look at this, it's a very professional outline written on the back of a Navy Federal Credit Union envelope, which I got in the mail today. Like a professional. So when people say that you're gonna, like, there's a lot of advice to avoid dating your book, because fiction, I guess, is supposed to be timeless by some standards, which I'm not I'll get into this later. I don't really agree with that idea. But people will say, well, if you write stuff and your use slang, it becomes cringe. Or if you rely on, you mention a certain business, that business would go out of business and then you don't have it anymore. And yeah, and then your book suddenly becomes outdated and no longer fresh and new. It's now old. So there's a couple of ways people are afraid that you're going to do this. And here are some of the top ones. The top one is usually slang. This is where I see this come up the most, is people say, well, don't use modern slang. Trying to keep up with modern slang, it changes too fast. To a point, I agree, because slang, especially nowadays, seems to have a very low shelf life. Like, I remember the slang being fairly consistent through most of the 90s. It is its own cliche now, but at the time, it wasn't like it was flash in the pan. And now it takes I'd say about 6 months from something to go from something that the hip kids are using to something that is getting overplayed to something that ends up in like really cringy ads and stuff. And by that point, it stops being cool. And then it gets a new shelf life for a lot of it and becomes ironic. I feel like I almost always don't catch on to slang until it's passed into the ironic stage. And because I am a 40-year-old mom, every time I use slang, it has a slight edge of irony to it. I don't like this ankle on my face. I'm going to switch. There. Not that that helps much. But I'm still very square jawed today. I don't know why that is, because I have a very round face. Or was I? Yeah, so when I use slang, it's almost always to get a reaction out of my teenagers. I have two of them now, which is hard because one of them just turned 13, and I'm not used to having two teenagers. A leaf just blew across the porch, and I thought it was a mouse. I'm very jumpy today, so that was what that. But no, I have two teenagers, and both of them, like the other day, we were going to, like I said, Toledo in my last video, and I made a joke about Skibbity, Ohio, and Corin's like, I'm going to pretend you did not say that, Mom. But yeah, we both, me and my husband, like to use Gen Alpha slang just to make Claire and Corinne cringe. So yeah, slang can, especially nowadays, date a book in a bad way, because it just kind of makes you feel like you're trying to be hip with the kids, and you're probably missing out. And even if you are hip with the kids in that moment, by the time the book gets into publication, even if you're doing a fast publication as an indie, let alone doing traditional publishing where it can take multiple years for a book to get out, the slang has definitely become dated by that point. So yeah, slang is a mixed bag. That said, there is a point where slang stops becoming trendy and goes into that stage of intentionally ironic. And you can get away with a lot. Like, I still use YOLO in a ironic way for some of my characters. In fact, I even, like, one of them will say it and the other will say, no one says that anymore. Or the others will roll their eyes. And it's like they're in on the joke. This is dated slang. This is something that nobody says unironically. And you can get away with a lot more if you do it that way. And then you can, after, like, older slang that has managed to get itself into the common vernacular, because a lot of terms that we use day to day were at one point slang. Like, even things that are completely in a bit, I don't know, that's not a word, completely common every day. Like okay was a slang, or hello was a slang term at one point. So sometimes eventually it does become just part of the vernacular and you can just use it. That said, when we go into like whether you want to date your books, this is one thing you can do is that I intentionally date my superhero books. Like I literally put dates in them. I have some that are set in 2020. I have some that are set in 24. I've got some that are set in 2037 at this point because they're near future. And I very intentionally write them of their time. With the ones that are set in the future, I try to avoid using things that are super modern. Like in the one set in 2020 and the one set in 2025, I reference Instagram and Twitter. That's one thing historically since my books are alternate history because there are world plus superheroes, there are some things that I do which are intentional alternate history, things that didn't happen in their world that happened in ours. Like I make a joke about there not being Star Wars special editions where they replaced things with CGI and made Griot show first. There's a joke in one of my books that never happened in our world. The pandemic never happened in that world because I started writing it in 2019, right before the pandemic was really starting to gain hold, and I didn't know how it was going to shake out. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't think any of my readers wanted to think about it either, so I just left it off, even though the book's set in 2020, so it's alternate history. That never happened. And one of the alternate history things I've done is that Twitter never changed its name in my world because I can't unironically call it, I can't even ironically call it X. It's weird to me. X is a weird thing to call a website or a social media thing. Sorry for people who like X. But my point is that I use things that are dated in my 2020 and 2025 set books, but things that are set in 2037, a lot of times I will make up stuff. Like I will make up social media apps that they're using in the future. I will make up businesses because I don't know what's going to go under. And of course, I can't always fall back on my alternate history excuse if something does change. But for the most part, I try to avoid that. There's a bug on me. All right, so there's some inevitability about being dated because we can't predict the future. There's some good examples of this just in how things have changed. Like if you read, like let's say a Nancy Drew book, and I know I say like a lot. I am a 90s kid, so just you're gonna have to deal with it. If you read a Nancy Drew book, there's not really a set time that they're set. You can kind of get a 1960s, 1950s feel for some of them. Some of them were written earlier than that, but I think if I'm correct, that some of them were rewritten at some point to change them, so it depends on which version you got. But they do kind of have like this general old-fashioned Americana, but they're still different because they don't have cell phones. The advent of cell phones changed the way people communicate, interact so much. And not just in we have a phone in our pocket, we have a camera in our pocket. We have an ability to look up things. If you don't know something, you can just look it up. There's so many things that you have to take into account now with fiction that you didn't have to take into account before cell phones. Same with the internet, same with computers, same with, oh gosh, what's another good example? Social media. There's all these things that we just couldn't predict. And now a book, like if a book has somebody paying with a paper check, it automatically feels a little bit old-fashioned. Nobody pays not nobody. Some people still do pay with paper checks, but it's getting rarer and rarer. And eventually, I can kind of see a world where banks stop issuing paper checks, or they're very specific and you only go for cashier's check. I can see that happening in the future. So as technology changes, books are going to become dated no matter what you do. Another thing is airport security. That old cliche of people rushing up to the airport gate to stop their loved one from getting on the plane before they never see them again. You can't really do that now because airport security is a thing that wasn't in the past. So it is inevitable that your books will become dated in some way if you are writing modern fiction, like set in contemporary America or the UK or any place in like the real world. If you're writing real world fiction, you're probably going to be dated at some point. If you're writing alternate world history, unfortunately, you're probably also going to become dated because even trends change, and the type of writing that is accepted and considered good writing now, and the type we're trained to do, the type we're accustomed to, uh, it's going to change over and over again. Like you can kind of tell when you pick up a book from a past generation and the writing. In fact, to the point where sometimes I'll pick up a modern book and I'm like, well, this reads like it was written 20 years ago. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely a distinct thing. There's a feel to older fiction that I honestly think is not a terrible thing. I wouldn't want someone to have to pick up my book and not get a sense of time and place and my personality and my choices. Like, I want those all to be a unique cocktail of what I was writing and when I was writing. And I think that's actually good. Not everything needs to be tailored to the moment. We're trying to trace trends and stuff, but timeless things isn't necessarily timeless because it doesn't embrace its time. It's timeless because it transcends that, and something trying to be super trendy or in the moment, it's not going to necessarily have that. That said, there are certain things that you read just to get a glimpse of that past, and I think that's something that we should never lose sight of, like reading older fiction. And I'm not just talking classics. I'm like picking up, there's something kind of fun about going to a used bookstore and finding stuff that's from like the 90s or the 80s, and just getting a glimpse into what was common in that time. What were people like? And like, you see this with like those really trippy 80s and early 90s fantasy covers, and they're so bizarre, and sometimes the ideas are so out there, and you're like, wow, this is this is the Wild West. And I think there is some curse now that we want everybody to be able to relate to things, and it's we're looking for something that feels like it's us, but part of fiction is exploring other times, other places, other ideas. So yeah, it's good to be able to have some grounding in something, even if that grounding may not be forever. And to an extent, writers are another way that we document history and we document facts. Like, it's not obviously fact, but it's a snapshot of how people thought at the time, what was important to them, what they wanted to focus on. Like, were they focusing on emotions? Were they focusing on fact and logic? What kind of characters were the heroes of their stories? All of that is very of its time, and I think it should be encouraged, and writers should embrace that. So that was a very long, rambly way to say it's okay to date a book. Maybe not with roses and chocolates. I don't know. Better than some dates, I'm sure. That's a bad joke. Sorry, I couldn't help it. But anyway, just let me know if this was skivity or if I have Riz. And then my daughters are cringing somewhere. They don't even know that I'm saying that, but just like the universe is sending vibes to them that, oh no, mom's using Gen Alpha slang again. All right, so thank you for joining the Weird Thing in the Woods. I will return shortly. Probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this or stop recording, go get a drink of water because my throat's already getting a little bit rough, and then come back and just record another one about my writer journey, because I said I was going to do that, and if I don't do it now, I probably won't do it for like a week and a half. So, bye.